untold generations of youth have been processed by the meat grinder of mediocrity, that is, modern education. And, inevitably, during this apprenticeship, they encountered one of the most popular tools meant to mold student from human into a digestible, pro-social, domesticated citizen. They encountered a multiple choice test. This method of generating results and evaluation is popular due to it being easily implemented by the underpaid pedagogical slave class. It simplifies the bureaucratic educational process by sharply decreasing any necessity of interaction with a particular individual. And in any case, anything that makes him particular or an individual should be ideally carved out. Because society in general doesn't really know what to do with anything that is not a nice grey symmetrical cube. Now imagine before you lying a series of questions accompanied by, let's say, 4 possible answers, one of which was chosen to be correct and appropriate by the ideological apparatchiks. If the educator feels unusually frisky, multiple answers might be correct. Eventually, armed with the correct skills and correct knowledge bestowed upon you by such an excellent educational system, you march towards the life of a citizen, for which you have been excellently prepared. And with open arms, there awaits you a sterile apparatus of modern liberal democracy, and the ever-present political, forcing you to pledge your allegiance not only during the election, but throughout every mundane ordeal. And, by design, nowhere in your repertoire is a tool that would alert you to an impossible reality. A reality in which none of the answers in the test is actually correct. If you would figure it out, then you would have to admit to yourself the painful realization that the system has failed. And such a failing system, based upon a failing paradigm, is unable to produce a correct approach. Welcome to Magne Mirare. During the last centuries, the march of modernity dealt a fatal blow to the traditional world, and together with it, to all the certainties that a man had in his own place in this world. Suddenly he was naked and whipped by the wild winds of change and progress. In the new time of uncertainty, and with the carcass of ancient divinity at his feet, he began to search for ways to make modernity bearable and compatible with fulfilled existence. Man sought how he could love the world again. The beast of communism tried to find the answers in lobotomization of everything that lies at the essence of humanity. With the ideal of amputating everything that is not strictly material, it replaced the dreaded opium of the masses with Marx-branded factory gruel. It lacked the capacity to soothe anyone's pain, but at least it had to be equally horrendous and poisonous to everyone. Many others have turned themselves to the ethnicity or to the nation as the sole certainty that wouldn't just vanish from the world outright. However, for the nation to be capable of fulfilling such a role as a certainty, it had to become one multicellular organism that had no choice but to play by the cruel but irrefutable rules of Darwinism. The world became a battlefield where there was no room for non-national. Especially terrifying maneuver was done on part of Germany, which sewed both extremes into one crime against nature, creating an ideological chimera of National Socialism, sprinkled with esoteric madness that could only end in an inflammation of global scale. All these demons are tied together by a central, often very explicit idea. The world would be a much simpler place for humans if we could somehow reshape them and carve them out of everything that seems to hinder them from fitting in. For the purpose of marketability, they promised surgical precision, but ended up performing butchery every time. Eventually, social engineers fancy it so much that if it means discarding what made humans human in the first place, like that cursed free will, it wouldn't matter. We are building a new kind of human anyway. These ideologies are nothing but a limited fetishization of specific scientific fields. There's nothing inherently wrong with the general axioms of materially economizing approach, or with Darwinian evolution. The absolute calamity, however, occurs when the blind cult of rationalism decides to subject every unrelated experience completely to its favorite scientific field, with roughly 3 decent predictions to its credit. Just because we understand why birds in Galapagos have different beaks, we shouldn't embark on complete restructuring of the entire demographic of society based on such findings. Why do people develop such an impressions? Because reductionist approaches, by design, omit broader human experience and leave one vulnerable to the idea that this broader holistic world was not relevant in the first place. Therefore, their chosen ultimate field must surely produce the correct choice. After all, those Galapagos beaks were explained brilliantly. Amidst the horror of the world, which humanity deepened multiple times with its search for definitive answers, it's no wonder that a line of thought emerged, striving to bring humanity itself to the forefront, to guide people to love the new world by first teaching them to love themselves, self-esteem, dignity, individualism, personal responsibility, and the right to self-determination. This is the arsenal of promises and demands that democracy used to unravel the Gordian knot of the 20th century. Hand in hand with democracy, the decentralized bottom-up approach of the invisible hand of the market followed. It allowed space both for irrefutable evolutionary Darwinism and for the enrichment of the common man, of course, provided that society is healthy and maintains social cohesion through the mutual interdependence of all members of a complex system. The undeniable triumph then became the greatest case study in history. The Cold War, in which the snake oil of communism suffocated whole nations and their spirits, while the remedy of the West led societies to come out of the conflict with undeniable, albeit naive, optimism. At the beginning of this chapter, I had to start with the adversaries of democratic systems, because only through contextual comparison can one understand the significance of democratic ideals. Without comparison, the description of anything loses its meaning. Funnily enough, this is precisely what happened with the fall of the Soviet Union and the international communist regime in its traditional form. Suddenly, the Western individual arose and, with somewhat relieved breath, slowly began to realize that he no longer had anything to contextually compare with. At its core, democracy's ideal is rooted, of course, in the belief that within society, each person should be granted their proportional voice, a way to impact the political landscape, be it through electing a representative or engaging in personal, active political participation. The fact that this model is seen by many today as saintly isn't necessarily due to any remarkable functionality. It's primarily because it's compared to the altogether real demons of its competitors. As long as the empire of evil exists, the positive of our own determination remains evident. However, people live under assumption that democracy, in some sense, guarantees virtue. That is not true. We've retained from the triumph of 20th century an immense sense of assurance in the virtues of the Western system, and this illusion continues to influence our decisions in the 21st century. Democracy is merely a framework, capable of reshaping itself into any other form if it garners enough popular support. After all, the National Socialists in Germany triumphed democratically. Especially in our divided era, this is incredibly evident. Democratic societies have globally split into two very loose factions, somewhat elusive to pinpoint. Sometimes called liberals and conservatives, sometimes left wing and right wing, etc. All of these labels tend to change their meaning depending on the location, time, and even person that uses them. It is preposterous to believe that the plurality of societal argumentation and issues can be divided into two simple opposites, as it is surprisingly still believed by a large portion of the population. I, personally, suspect that this is a specific disease of the American system that the rest of the world is inheriting, or, possibly, is being forced to adopt, since it makes control of the political systems, oppositions, and populace at large easier, through a crude, simplistic, movie-like divide between two moldable tribal labels. Suddenly, people don't seek their ideological rival in some external realm of evil, but rather in their neighbor. In a futile cycle, time and again, we witness the pendulum swing from one side to the other without any real progress being made. People find themselves either in a phase where their ideological foe has won. This is the time when they grit their teeth and proclaim virtues and dream of the better days that surely once existed. And they spew venom as much as possible. Or, in the second phase, they themselves win and strut proudly through the heap of manure, crowing about the color of their feathers. It's a brief period of intoxication, followed by sobering up. Because they realize that as much as they venerated their candidate in comparison to their ideological enemy, they are both from the same litter of incompetent fools. But they can't really say that, can they? If they did, they would invalidate every cry of virtue and perfection they loudly let us hear. By invalidating the system, they would reveal the immense emptiness of their sad, meaningless existence. Here lies the crux of contemporary democracy. It fails in fostering virtue, actively preventing people from loving the world and finding true meaning. At best, it provides the masquerade of caring. The cycle repeats, and the world has changed so much that, just like at the beginning of the 20th century, our place has been lost again. Sadly, democracy seems to be correct choice only when we've already been traumatized by all the wrong ones. The general setting of our time is characterized by the absence of virtue, meaning, and reasons to love the world. In this spiritual vacuum, much like 100 years ago, many individuals tend to turn to those who promise them virtue and purpose. However, these propositions, once again, rely on fetishizing the limited realm of rationalism. In more elaborate scenarios, you encounter extensive statistical and economic analysis, where the temple of numbers operates as a spellbinding charm. Regardless of the fact that with just one dataset, such acrobatics can be performed that it could defend anything that tickles your fancy. For those who aren't particularly inclined to invest excessive time in defending their sense of purpose, there's a shorter, more impactful phrase: trust the experts. Yet, in both cases, it boils down to the same limited fetishization of materialism, rationalism, and science as was committed by the ideological demons of the 20th century. These materializing approaches attempt to substitute love for the world with its practical taming. The world isn't dreadful and doesn't need love when it lacks stories, soul, and mythological agency. Of course, ignoring the world's soul is not a viable solution for everyone. Materialism doesn't leave room for love, so much needed by a human being. In such a situation, the proposition of liberal democracy, such as self-esteem and self-determination, turn into their twisted, tainted brethren, decadent self-love and sinful pride, Unaware of how to deal with the absence of love for the world, many have turned to a twisted love for their own identity, their group, or their race. An extreme reaction to the constricting soulless materialism then becomes a resentful attempt to shatter the shackles of reality itself. Now, not only you can choose your identity, but you can aggressively impose it on others, just to validate the distorted thing you believe to be fulfillment. Among all these extremes stands the abandoned silent majority of human beings who are trying to keep up the flickering light of, though ordinary, but still priceless hope of modern age. Hope to continue undisturbed in their everyday lives. Hope to work, to have friends and family. Hope to love and love their neighbors. However, in many ways, it's precisely their ordinary human failing that lie at the root of our contemporary problem. It's this numerous group of individuals who, with their unwavering faith in democratic system and under the mistaken impression of their own insignificance, enabled contemporary demons to flourish. Fundamentally, when looking at the ballot, they believe that if they can eliminate those obviously evil, then the remaining ones must be the right choice. But the fact that they aren't obviously evil doesn't mean that they are the right fit for the position. Not even the best contemporary candidates can guarantee the virtues and meanings our era demands. Today's democracy simply falters because the elites have rotted in such decadence that they are no longer capable of producing a correct choice. The reality of history is that societies die when their elites are failing. Long-term survival of society is not based upon its short-term political regime, but upon the ability to remove and replace ruling elites when they become useless, arrogant, self-centered, and drunk on their own divine power, thus losing the capability to competently lead. For instance, ancient Chinese remedy involves the invasion of a steppe horde and subsequent sinization of new rulers in about 3 generations. The result amalgamates the new arrival's prowess with the enduring values of Confucian apparatus. The Roman Empire underwent such transformation also multiple times. It started with the expulsion of Roman kings, later continued with overshadowing the Roman Senate with autocrats and the military, and, eventually, ended in excising the entire decadent western half of the empire while retreating to Constantinople. The issue of replacing decadent elites isn't specifically a problem of democratic system. Democracy merely joins the ranks of historical systems grappling with this issue. Inevitably, all systems face the problem that they are shaped and represented by elites for whom anything other than the status quo signifies their own failure. Thus, the elites need to maintain the impression among their subjects that preserving the status quo is necessity for common good, a notion about as useful as blindfolding oneself during plane's descent. To pacify especially vocal opposition, there always can be some sort of insignificant concession. What specifically plagues democracy to its peril is its adeptness at convincing the populace that democracy inherently is always virtuous and its actions are inherently right, regardless of how ruthlessly the elites then cast away any morality, living solely for their hedonistic gluttony, or, in much worse case, for their favorite ideological fetishization of rationalism. This problem is broader than what the democratic system itself is capable of dealing with. It's subservient to the general societal paradigm. This paradigm is failing, and the elites are the last ones still benefiting from it. Even if actively hurting the world at large, elites will be open to the idea of change only when they themselves are threatened. Only a full replacement of the ruling demographics and complete reevaluation of the paradigm can propel us forward. Going to the polls is meaningless if no choice is correct. Perhaps it goes beyond meaninglessness. By adamantly trying to participate in elections, even by choosing the lesser evil, one's participation vote doesn't just contribute to the winner's mandate, but to the mandate and legitimacy of the failing system in its current form. I explicitly and fully condemn the elites in their entirety. Currently, they are a hindrance to humanity, and as long as they remain in power, so does any system or establishment they operate. No ordinary elections as conducted thus far seem to be able to heal the wounds that society feels. Yet, the solution isn't necessarily found in any other form of governance either. Democracy still maintains its primacy compared to the beasts lurking in the shadows. Primarily, this is because in times of crisis, democracy tends to slow the decision making and actions of rulers, which, in times when rulers have gone mad, is not a detriment. Of course, in times of necessity, such as in real or believed crisis, they will revoke everything that makes democracy democratic. But, at the very least, this process will waste their time. Several times throughout history, between 494 BC and 287 BC, the Roman Republic experienced a phenomenon known as secessio plebis, the secession of the plebeians. When the majority class of Rome felt abused and endangered by the unfair treatment of the patrician order, they closed their businesses and workshops and abandoned the city to demonstrate that this order couldn't survive without their participation. This act beautifully illustrates the silent power held in the hands of the masses. In our specific situation, we obviously cannot abandon the world as it is. After all, that's been happening for some time, and it hasn't hurt the elites in any way. In modern economy, it's unimaginable for an individual to deny themselves the opportunity to earn living and support themselves and their family. However, what we can do is to challenge the legitimacy of the current regime at every turn, every step. Show the elites our discontent and express our disapproval whenever possible. We need to stop choosing the lesser evil and thus legitimizing the mandate of the system that does not offer good answers anyway. Many strive to encourage active political participation in an attempt to change the ruling structures. However, the system is so entrenched that it either crushes any outsider or compromises and infects them with the same disease of corruption. Trying to politically succeed now would be like building a house in an actively decaying neighborhood. All new timber would rot within 2 years. Political activity isn't a priority at the moment, as it doesn't bring any hope. Yet. However, the democratic media circus is suitable for distracting and deluding the elites, who get lost in it like in a labyrinth, losing their initiative. Of course, this advantage dissipates every time we ourselves delude our attention in the same labyrinth. Real change must be happening upstream. Before social force transforms into the political, it resides in two worlds, the world of technology and the world of culture. Regarding technology, it's precisely through decentralized technologies of the internet and new media that the modern population can share information and knowledge in ways that render the legacy media toothless. The hysterical war against misinformation and the sick propagandist efforts seen in legacy media are not sign of power, but an acknowledgement of their own decline. The more technologically independent we become from the leviathan of the media circus, the more resilient we grow against the delusion used to keep us blind and obedient. In the realm of culture, our efforts must lead to the creation of a viable parallel society. Alternative, economically self-sufficient institutions that deepen our independence. Within these spaces, open philosophical discourse can flourish, minimally tainted by the dirty games of the arrogant, self-centered establishment, which would rather see society descend into civil war than face responsibility for the mess they've caused. For these alternative institutions, the key is to navigate the crisis and watch as the Darwinian winds sweep away outdated forms of life. To separate these two worlds from the hegemony of current elites, we must draw our specialists from a broader audience, where true merit is not judged by an insignificant university degree. The incantation of experts say loses its illusory power when we deny elites the right to determine who qualifies as an expert and who doesn't. In an ideal world, each of us would strive to become such an expert by genuinely educating ourselves and by exploring data across diverse fields. We would aim to gain a real overview and understanding of the world that surpasses modern education. After all, modern education equates to cultural sabotage executed upon the population. In times of impending crisis, it's crucial to remember that every step toward becoming independent from the state and the political makes one more resilient. Most societal processes are improved when one manages to outmaneuver the state. Of course, this is only achievable through small steps, as state structures tend to grow like cancer, spreading their slippery tentacles wherever they can. Yet, beyond these practicalities, the most critical part of the change that must occur is within the ephemeral space of the soul itself. It is the failure of the inner self that has led to the apathy that allowed evil to flourish. It's the absence of genuine and sincere self-respect and respect for the world at large that permits unchecked proliferation of the demons of our time: identity politics, corruption, tribalism. To regain one's place in the world and steer towards peace and prosperity, a person must rediscover the beauty of their own story. We must rekindle the power of mythology within, which archetypally situates us in the world and binds us to it. This is the process of re-enchanting the world within the framework of a spiritual renaissance, which, in the long term, acts as a counterbalance to prevailing materialistic consumerism. It happens when one finds meaning in his story within the world, when one assumes a position of dignity and humility. When a man loves and respects his own story, he tends to it as well, and, consequently, regardless of what is permitted by the current system and its paradigm as a possible choice, he will always strive towards virtue as the correct one.